The United States fully supports Israel's right to defend itself against indiscriminate rocket attacks from Hamas and other Gaza-based terrorist groups that have taken the lives of innocent civilians in Israel.
Hundreds of Palestinians, including children, were killed or injured. Dozens of Israelis were also injured or killed as the two sides exchanged rocket fire. And President Biden and his administration had really put an emphasis on working behind the scenes, and they would refer to it as, quiet, intensive diplomacy. And the president had spoken to Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel 4 times over the course of just 5 or 6 days. But despite that, the president had been sort of reluctant to come out and explicitly call for a ceasefire or condemn the violence, really, or condemn Israel for their actions. So it sort of reached this breaking point as they were pushing for a ceasefire, and it appears that they finally reached one on Thursday into Friday. But yeah, so the president obviously, hailed that as a positive step, but certainly people were looking for him to take a very active role, and the White House sort of pushed back on that and chose to play a more behind the scenes role as this all played out. Progressives criticized Joe Biden because, they essentially viewed it as he was not taking seriously, the casualties among Palestinians, that, he was essentially not pushing back hard enough on what Israel was doing, firing rockets towards civilians. And then on the other side, you had Republicans who felt like Joe Biden was not clearly speaking out enough in defense of Israel and saying that Israel, had a right to be doing what it was doing, essentially, and firing rockets and defending itself. So he was sort of caught in the middle. Both sides were essentially looking for him to speak out more forcefully, but on sort of different sides of the conflict. So it was certainly sort of a difficult political spot and sort of a no-win spot for the president. And I think that sort of explains and gets at why the White House essentially kept saying, we're going to work behind the scenes, we're going to do this quiet, intensive diplomacy, and that should the president come out and make a big statement in the middle of all this, it wouldn't necessarily help. So I think, the fact that he wasn't really getting either side to fully support what he was doing sort of explains why they chose not to have the president out there making these big public pronouncements as this was all playing out. I think the White House will definitely, keep a careful eye on what's happening in the Middle East. I think a number of other countries in the Middle East that kind of were helping to broker the ceasefire or monitoring the situation will also be very mindful of whether the two sides, can hold to the ceasefire and hold to their agreement. Certainly, it's a volatile area, it's a volatile time, and I think a lot of people will be carefully watching to see whether the two sides sort of maintain this, whether there are sort of little, small fires of violence or whatever it may be. But for now, I think, certainly the Biden administration and other world leaders are happy to see and encouraged to see this ceasefire take hold. And, we'll see whether the Biden administration wants to move forward now with policy in the Middle East. They talk about a 2-state solution, or if, tensions are still at a point where that's just not really a practical or achievable thing to do. But certainly, I think in the immediate future, it'll be a focus on whether this ceasefire will hold.
I believe the Palestinians and Israelis equally deserve to live safely and securely and to enjoy equal measures of freedom, prosperity, and democracy. My administration will continue our quiet, relentless diplomacy toward that end.